Welcome back to Everyday Mathematics. This is part 4, and I'm talking about geometry and spatial relations. Hello, everyone. This is Everyday Mathematics part 4, how to follow a child's curiosity to conquer your math anxiety and help them succeed in math. What to look for when your child accepts the invitation into mathematics, namely through the Boco Math Lifestyle. And we're going to take a peek at geometry and spatial relations. Just to recap, in part 1, I talked about following a child's curiosity to tackle your anxiety. My anxiety, specifically I shared about, was bugs. And I talked about how if we strengthen our relationship with the subject, done in concert with our child, then everyone learns. In part 2, I told you some easy ways to invite your family into math. Living a Boco Math lifestyle creates a lot of math-rich experiences, ones that can strengthen your relationship with the subject and your child. And in part 3, I talked about the numeracy and the operations in algebra that emerge from a Boco Math lifestyle. Today, we're going to take a closer look within the subject of math, all these topics that are revisited over and over again for many years. I already talked about numeracy and operations in algebra last time. Today, I'm going to talk about geometry and spatial relations. And then I'll follow up next time with measurement and data. Let's take a look at geometry and spatial relations. It's all about shapes and how they go together. We talk about the names of the shapes, especially with our early learners. We're looking at two-dimensional shapes like circles, triangles, and all the many types of quadrilaterals like squares and rectangles and diamonds and trapezoids and other less regular things. In 3 dimensions, we talk about spheres, which are just balls, and pyramids and cubes. Now, pyramids and cubes are some of my kids' favorite things to make using magnetiles. We also talk about the features of the shapes. So, how many sides does the shape have? And how many corners does it have? A triangle has 3 sides and 3 corners. We also talk about the measure of the sides and the angles. We can do this descriptively with early learners and talk about how an equilateral triangle has 3 equal sides and 3 equal angles. Or we could talk about rectangles and say that 2 sides are very long and 2 sides are very short, but all the angles look about the same because they are the same. And the spatial relations part, that's fitting the shapes together. Across grade levels, let's take a look at what geometry and spatial relations is going to look like. It's all about recognizing the shapes and naming them, describing the shapes, and then using them. In preschool, really, it's all about learning their names and building with different shapes. Beginners can have more advanced conversations about how you might describe the shapes with words and numbers. Intermediate learners start talking about shapes in context and describing those shapes with algebra. So again, last time I talked to you about writing stuff down. As our learners progress from preschool to beginning to intermediate, it's time to start writing down some of those things on paper. And advanced learners, I'm talking way advanced, we are getting into trigonometry, which is basically operations in algebra and geometry combined. Geometry and spatial relations in life. Well, we see these things a lot in art and architecture and in playing games. In art and architecture, just looking around the houses in your neighborhood, you're going to see a lot of different shapes, and you can talk about their form as well as their function. So the shape of the roof line, the shape of the windows, and the shape of the doors, the shape of the columns that might be holding up the roof over a porch or something like that. Lots of good observations to make just around your neighborhood at the architecture. And if you get to look at some art books, go to museums, or notice art just around in the world, those are also good places to talk about the shapes you see and how those things are fitting into the world. Now, playing games is a huge thing, because we could talk about playing games like card games and board games, or and puzzles. We could talk about video games. Minecraft is huge around here. So is Terraria. And also, we could talk about sporting events, soccer games and baseball games and that kind of thing. And in all of these different places, there's opportunity to talk about the shapes you see and how we can relate to them. In preschool, the puzzles might look like building with blocks and putting pieces together and sorting them and getting them into different puzzly type things. And they also will start noticing the shapes in life. They might notice that the ramp at the skate park looks like a triangle or a trapezoid. They might know that the soccer ball is a sphere. Or you could tell them that. And then they start learning all those good math words. Beginners can get more specific for the names of the shapes. For instance, there are lots of different types of triangles out there and lots of different types of quadrilaterals out there, and that you can start exploring what makes those different shapes unique by making comparisons between their sides and their angles and how those things go together. And beginners start making decisions based on those comparisons. I'll say it again, our magnetiles have been played with for more than 8 years now, and the geometry and spatial relations that they afford are incredible. And it's really been a matter of me figuring out all of the math words to go with the shapes, the crazy shapes that my kids make, both in 2 dimensions on the floor, but then also again in 3 dimensions when they start folding those different squares and triangles up onto one another. Intermediate learners, this is where we start adding numbers and operations in algebra to their repertoire for describing shapes and how they fit together. And it's good to use those words when we talk about it. Let's add these 2 squares together to make a rectangle, right? Things like that. And if you can start getting them to draw things, draw their art, draw their building that they're going to make, read Iggy Peck, things like that, and start talking about the numbers and the operations in algebra, start sketching in some numbers and adding and subtracting symbols to describe how those shapes are going to go together. And advanced learners start looking at examining curves, but I'm going to leave that for the more advanced learners. All right, so our job is to provide math experiences through the Boco Math Lifestyle, notice math as it emerges, and talk about it using math words. Talking about geometry and spatial relations, well, in geometry, you're just going to explore the shapes verbally, talk about them, name them, describe them. How many sides do they have? What are the lengths of the sides? Are they the same? Are they different? How are they different? talk about the shape of the corners, and on and on. In spatial relations, say, let's figure it out. Do those things fit together? Will your foot fit into that shoe? Make comparisons. Bigger, smaller, same, taller, wider. Those are all things that are spatial relations in everyday life. And specifically, when it's done in the context of shapes, it's geometry and spatial relations learning. And then also combine shapes to make something new. Separate shapes into smaller parts and talk about them. And you can find the words you need in children's books. And again, I have a very long collection at my website that you can find. And, go check them out at your library, see if you like them. And if you can't find exactly what you're looking for, feel free to ask. I either know and I can point you in the right direction, or I'll find out and I'll point you in the right direction. So that's it for Everyday Math Part 4. Talked about geometry and spatial relations that emerge from a Boco Math lifestyle. Next up, measurement and data. That's it for today. Next time, I'll talk to you about measurement
and data. See you next time.